Hello, and welcome to the Battle Frontier podcast, where we aim to help you level up in your career as a competitive Pokemon TCG player. I'm Aaron Curry. Here with me, as always, my co-host John Orgel. John, how are we doing this week?
I'm doing good, Aaron. Thanks for asking. Yeah, had a nice little weekend. Not too Pokemon centric this weekend. We just did some. I had my in-laws in town, so we hung out with them. But yeah, yesterday was fun for League. We had somebody brought their Chaos Cube, which I know Chip or Puka Sukovic, who's a longtime player, now works for TPCI. He was the originator of that, but it's kind of become almost bigger than him at this point. It's a cube that spans from base set all the way to current format, and has a lot of good balance in it. So it was a lot of fun. And fun fact, drafted what we'll talk about in our time capsule today a little bit. So just a teaser for later on in the show. But yeah, it was a good week. How about you?
Yeah, that's a nice preview for the listeners later on down the line. But as for what I did this week, also not super Pokemon focused. My son had some makeup baseball games due to some other scheduling conflicts and whatnot that we've had throughout the season. So we did baseball Friday. So not going to league on Friday night then because
Hmm.
unfortunately, with only the one store in town, I've got the only option I have being that one night. So with that not happening, there was no official in-person Pokemon this week. Still plenty of playing online, but it was Baseball Friday, Baseball Sunday, and because
Lots
both of
of
those are pretty
baseball.
locked up, trying to get stuff done around the house on Saturday. And then I did actually learn yesterday that we do have another store in town that is going to start up doing Pokemon at some point in the near future, but they haven't
Let's
nailed
go.
what day, what time, or anything like that yet. So that may open up some options at some point down the line. But I think that we kind of wanted to jump into an initial segment before we do all of our standard fare and have you share some information about some kind of more exciting or interesting news that you've had come up recently.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, we started. I got contacted recently by Tabletop Academy to help out with their new Pokemon Club program in Virginia. It's something they've been doing for a while out in the West Coast. They're, I think, in Seattle. Basically, it's just like an after-school program for kids, centered around Pokemon trading card game, and it's a really cool program. They've recruited a lot of professors around the country, so if you're interested in potentially working for them, I think Aaron will put a link in the description for this podcast, and definitely check it out. It's a great resource for most communities. A lot of kids are struggling coming out of COVID with social skills and regaining a lot of the stuff that was lost when we didn't have in person school. And Pokemon's a great way to just kind of ensure that kids can make new friends, learn a new activity, learn to read, learn to do math, all those great things in such a fun environment. And it's such a cool thing for me. I thankfully have most of my afternoons free, so I'm able to kind of drive over to school and help out with that. I haven't done it. I haven't started quite yet. I still have to do some training, and I'm still waiting to hear back on an assignment for school. But yeah, I'm excited to see what happens with that.
So, just for my sake, is this
Yeah.
something with Tabletop Village where they're actually going through all of the procedures and everything to help set you up with a school, or do you have to find that on your own?
Tabletop Village is helping me. They're providing the schools. I have like a
Awesome.
coordinator that I'm working with who manages all the schools, and then I just go set up and then get paid to do like 3 hour programs once a week or so. So once we get schools going, that's pretty much will be what happens. Is there'll be like a schedule. It'll be like how to play, and then they'll do like for fun tournaments and stuff, and then encourage kids to get involved in organized play at like the league level and league challenges and stuff. But yeah, it'll be supported by Tabletop, and I'm very excited. I know it's something I wish I had when I was in high school or
Oh, for
even
sure.
middle
For
school.
sure.
Um, it's one of those things like kids get made fun of for stuff like that in middle school, but I think a lot of it is just like uh, they don't really understand a lot of it, and I think it'll be fun to get some new Pokemon trainers out in the world.
Absolutely. And a lot of times there are parents or even, grown adult players that don't necessarily know where to go to look to find the avenue to
Mm-hmm.
find out where they could play. And so giving kind of this on ramp for local students is a really cool thing. So like awesome, like shout outs to Tabletop for setting up this program and expanding it to the point that they've expanded it to.
Yeah, it's a
So,
really cool program. I've had the pleasure of it wasn't through tabletop, but last year I had a have a teacher or a guidance counselor friend who wanted me, and I did a Pokemon day at her school.
mhm.
And we just went through like how to play the game, and I gave them little 30 card starter decks that you get if you do like a play lab. They
Okay,
hand out like kind of just basic like fighting water dark decks with like Lucario V, um, Greninja V, and I think
gotcha.
Umbreon V is the other one. And they're like pretty simple. It doesn't really have any like complex interactions going on. I don't think there's stadiums or anything like that. But it's really fun. It's just a good introduction, and it's something that I'm glad that Pokemon's putting more and more emphasis on lately, and that it's translating it to. Um, I'm seeing like easier opportunities to teach kids how to play, which is kind of fun. Like they've put out
Yeah.
like the My First Battle recently,
Yep.
and then they've done like the Battle Academy. So Pokemon has like a really nice range of products right now, varying from very very beginner centric to now we have like the league battle decks, like the Charizard one coming out. It's going to be basically like you could roll up to a League Cup and like have a winning record with it. So it's pretty
Oh, for
cool.
sure. It definitely puts the theme decks of old to shame. I mean, those things were just a great
Oh my
travesty
gosh.
compared to things that we have nowadays.
Yeah,
But
for
yeah,
sure.
once again, shout outs to Tabletop Village. Really cool program. If you're interested, check it out. We will have a link in the description of this episode. And with that, we will get back to our regularly scheduled programming. And I'm going to take my chance to try to stump John on this week's edition of Blaine's Quiz Show. So, John, we're going to do things slightly differently this week. And I know we've mentioned potentially doing this as we kind of scroll through things from episode to episode. But this week, instead of doing increasing difficulty, we're actually going to move backwards chronologically. So the first question is going to be the most recent event, and the last one will be the oldest event. Each correct answer will still only be worth 1 point. You will be allowed one hint across all three questions. And this week, I've opted, with your permission, of course, not to make these questions multiple choice because I felt that it would make the answers too easy to find. And to compensate for that, I'm going to tell you that this week's theme is rogue decks at international championship events.
Oh goodness. Okay. We'll
So
see how
let's
this
go ahead.
goes.
We'll jump into our first question, which reads: Despite the hype, upon the release of Paradox Rift, Roaring Moon flopped at LAIC 24. Instead, this deck surprised everyone by taking second and first place in the Masters and Juniors divisions, respectively.
LAIC 2024.
So the 2024 season,
Oh
it's
yeah.
LAIC 23.
What one LAIC? Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm trying to remember. This is bad. I should know. This is like last year. This is so bad. Uh, what format was that? It was right after Paradox Rift.
Yep,
So we had Obsidian Flames and then Paradox Rift. I think Temporal Forces before that. Okay.
correct.
Hmm.
So all of the battle styles cards are still legal, I
Wasn't
believe.
Snorlax though. It was not that. Battle
Uh,
Styles. Okay, so that was still legal. It wasn't Malamar. Wait, did Malamar win? It didn't win Masters. Oh, what won Masters? This is embarrassing. All right.
Now, keep in mind, this is not the deck that won. This is the deck that came in second in Masters, and it came in first place in Juniors.
I see. I misread that. Okay. What came in second? Was it Malamar? I think it was Rapid Strike Malamar. So I'm gonna go with Rapid Strike Malamar.
Okay, locking it in.
Yep.
Unfortunately, you are actually incorrect. It was still a Paradox Rift card. It was
Oh
Entei
my
and Iron
gosh.
Valiant, piloted by Noah Sawyer in the Masters division and Prince W in the Juniors division. Oh,
I feel so bad. Like I know Noah as a player. I watched this and I just totally blanked on it. I apologize. But yeah, all
hey,
right.
it's not easy when you're on the spot, man.
I know. It's like I'm trying to remember like what the format was. And then as soon as I see it, I'm just like, yeah, I can
Of
picture
course, right.
it. Yeah, Noah
So
losing. Yeah, but having
we'll
that
move
amazing run.
we'll move backwards in time ever so
Mhm.
slightly. In a field full of Inteleon decks,
Third
this
place.
deck managed to climb all the way to third place at NAIC 2022. Again, keep in mind, tonight's theme is rogue decks
Mhm.
at international championships.
All right, so Azul won NAIC 2022, I think.
Correct?
That sounds right. What got third? All right, I need a hint for this. I think we'll just throw it away at this point. I need to
Sure.
salvage something.
So the hint for this question is that the player of the deck is Sander Wojcik.
Hmm. Oh, what the heck did Xander play?
And I'll also tell you it is not just a control pile. It is
Yeah.
highlighted by a very specific card.
Mm-hmm. The Control King. What was he on at this point? So Pidgeot wasn't in format. This was uh, Arceus decks, Inteleon decks.
Correct.
Wasn't Galarian Wheezing. Um, oh my gosh. I'm going to like, I know the answer, Aaron. This is just frustrating to me. It's like, this is just one of those things like you don't think about it on a daily basis and it just escapes your memory.
Oh, for sure.
This is going
It
to be like
seems so
never.
obvious when you look at the results of the tournament, but
Yeah, right. What was Xander on for this? It was something wacky. I know it was something crazy that nobody was ready for, and I just don't remember what it was. This is like my hardest category. I think I just lose. All right, I'll just go with um, Snorlax Control because Pokemon Go was in format, right? Yeah.
actually, this was right before Pokemon Go
Oh my gosh.
released.
Never mind.
So, I think we're still going to take your answer, though.
Yeah, that's fair.
And this was actually Mewtwo v
Oh.
Union. Mewtwo v
And
Union,
then
which
yeah, this was such an epic game between him and Azul too. Just I remember watching. Oh my gosh.
very close, and there was a very real possibility that Sander actually would have taken the tournament down if he had
Yeah,
managed
I
to win
think
that
so.
match.
That was the deciding match because yeah, it came down to Azul winning like a long game one, and then game two never resolving or something like that.
Right.
Man, I am blowing this. This is
That's okay.
embarrassing.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I only got 1 point last week, too.
Yep. All right.
You
Let's see
still
if I
have a
can
shot here.
salvage it. I already am out of my hint, so we're
So, the final question, we're going to move
yep.
back a little bit earlier in that same year. And even though the strike, meaning the single, rapid, and fusion strike focused decks were all the rage, this deck surprised the competition and took second place at EUIC 2022.
I think this might be Suicune Ludicolo. I think that one I might just know. I'm just gonna lock it in and just get it over with. Suicune Ludicolo.
So Suicune Ludicolo actually did place at this event. I don't remember off the top of my head what place it got, but it
Yeah.
was not second place. The second place deck was Whimsicott V-Star, piloted by Frank
Frank
Persick.
Persick. Yeah. I forgot. I would not have got that.
So
I
maybe I did
remember
make
that
these a
now.
little bit too tough. But at the
It's
same
fine.
time, do you understand what I'm saying? Where if I had made these multiple choice, you'd been like, that's it. It's right there.
Yeah, yeah. I think I at least if you put the full Frank Persick Whimsicott, I think I could have got there. But my it's such a funny thing. Like I have like the good. It's like weird after coming out of COVID. My knowledge of stuff is not as strong as it was before COVID. I feel like between 2011 and 2019, I think I was.
Okay.
But I don't know. I should still like probably know who wins ICs. Those are pretty important.
Well, I mean, you
So
did know Azul won NAIC,
there's that.
but that's
But
okay. That's
I am
okay.
not.
We
I
live to
never
fight another
claimed to
day.
be his. Yeah, thank you. Salvage my ego. I didn't even get a single point this week, so you're still on top with I think a lead of 3-2. So we'll see how it goes next week. I'll try to come up with some good trivia questions, maybe some more Swalot questions.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I, I tripped you up. I told you I was going to give you a bunch of Swallow questions. I hid those away. I'm saving them for a rainy
Oh,
day.
yeah, for sure. You can't just I'm already read up on all the Swalot lore, so I have to
See,
forget
and you
it
need to
for a
forget
while.
it first, and then we'll come back
You
and we'll
got it. You
circle
got
back,
it.
and it'll just get you when you least expect it.
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
we're going to move on from that and look at what happened this weekend over in Lille, France, with the regional that they had once again in our Stellar Crown format. And starting off with the analysis of the meta, looking at day one, Raging Bolt once again just won over here in Louisville. Again, the top place deck as far as meta percentage goes on day one, followed by Lugia and Charizard, tied at 10% each. Then Palkia Dusknoir, Regidrago, and Dragapult all at 8%. And Terrapagos slightly off at 7%. And then there's a steep fall off to kind of the rest of the meta. And then moving forward to day two, Raging Bolt got hated out seemingly and
Mm-hmm.
kind of dropped off, not as bad as it did in Baltimore, but still dropped pretty heavily compared to its day one meta percentage, with Lugia rising up to eat up that excess meta share along with Regidrago. And we also see Palkia similarly fall off and drop down to a rather small size in day two as well. We see a little bit of a rise in Snorlax and Gardevoir, and Dragapult also falling off ever so slightly as things kind of move forward. I can't really say that any of these meta percentages surprised me. I still expected Raging Bolt to be super highly prioritized. I think that the success of Raging Bolt last week in Louisville
Mm-hmm.
made it so that Charizard would probably be seen as a better play moving forward. Lugia would be considered to be a better play moving forward. And, lo and behold, those decks pop up as the top three decks on the weekend.
Yeah, Lugia definitely had a great conversion from day one to day two here. And
Sure.
the top two decks definitely showed up. If we'll get into the top 16, top 8. But like Lugia and Drago had really good weeks for them. Yeah, I'm interested to see Gardevoir kind of get a little higher. I didn't think it was a really really good pick, but I guess it makes sense for it's got a good Raging Bolt, decent Charizard, and pretty good Drago matchup. So it makes sense. And Snorlax had a really good placement. Or percentage meta conversion percentage. I don't think is it even on the graphic for the best of the rest. No, I don't
I
think
was
it
in
is.
the unclassified category previously.
But that's still really good. Going from I'm sure then classified groups together, pretty much all the random decks. So from
Mm-hmm.
it going from unclassified to 18, I think it says.
Uh,
It's a little
9% or 10 decks total.
yeah. So 10 Snorlax out of 116, pretty strong.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that's really it's interesting because there's some decks in this format that people just won't play, and I think it's Lugia and Snorlax, and week after week we keep seeing those two decks convert really well. As and it's interesting people keep playing Raging Bolt, and it just keeps not converting super well, and it's at what point do you just move away from Raging Bolt and pick up a Lugia or pick up a Snorlax? I think that's kind of my question, right?
Well, I think that they had a bit of an excuse this week following Caleb's win and the
True.
light that he and Xander Perot shown on heavy counts of Bravery Charm in the deck being the way to play the deck. And unfortunately, they were met by just a barrage of tech and kind of, for lack of a better term, hate cards to that type of build. And we can shift over and look now at some of our top 8 or top 16 lists to represent that. So we can see James Cox took the event down.
Yeah.
Congrats to James. I believe this is his first major win overall. I know he'd had, several stellar finishes. Yeah, he had like a top 4 at Worlds at one point, and still, once again, stealing the victory of the EU regional from an EU player in the finals. I know that there was a funny tweet earlier this week from, I am blanking on what his actual name is. I know his Twitter handle is Dream Jew, about how the dominance of the Australian players needs to be studied And there were several replies to it stating, their cards are upside down, their decks are upside down, so no one can understand what they do. Any
uh,
advantage you can take, right?
yeah. I mean, you think after playing live for so long that people will be able to read cards upside down, but I don't know. Maybe
But when
they
I click on it, John, it
inverse it.
goes right side up, and it's totally
True,
fine.
that's true.
But we can
Well,
go ahead
maybe
and
you
look
should
at
stop
James's
clicking on it.
list and see that a lot of James's list is, heavily influenced or, inspired potentially by the list popularized by Isaiah Bradner. So we've got the 1/1 Noctowl line. But the big things, I think, for this weekend were the inclusion of Temple of Sinnoh, which kind of goes in and out of the deck. So we see the respect for Lugia in the list. And then we also see the copy of a Jamming Tower, which has come in and out of the deck, in a nod of respect towards those Bravery Charm heavy Raging Bolt decks, and then also being applicable for decks that run other tools, Off as an example, or a Sealstone in any of the Rotom based decks. There's a lack of Halucha in the list, but inclusion of Cleffa instead. So with Cleffa, Radzard, and Hoot Hoot, you can pretty easily get to a board where you can safely protect yourself in that Raging Bolt matchup from Iron Bundle, unless they have a Hard Gust.
Mm-hmm.
So you're able to get to a point where you can kind of mount a comeback with Radiant Charizard in that matchup specifically without having to put in cards like Noivern.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go. Like looking at this list versus like a Noivern list. When you start putting a Noivern, you start getting away from the strength of Reggie Drago, which is just the consistency and the ability to attack turn 2 consistently for some of the best attacks in the game at this moment.
Sure.
Just looking at the list, it's the same 60 as John Ang from Baltimore. You scroll down, it's kind of like the Reagan Retzloff Lugia list back in the day, where now this is just kind of getting passed around from top player to top player. And yeah, we see both Kywin and James played it for this regional,
Yep.
and as well as Brent. And then it looks like another player who got first in the juniors division for a little also play this list, which is pretty cool. I'd say it just shows like, hey, like this deck was a good meta call, and that's kind of I think the read is like Bolt with a bunch of tools one. So we'll go back to Reggie Drago with Jamming Tower. Try not to rely on too much on gizmics. Just focus on consistency.
For
That's
sure.
always a good strategy.
Yep. Absolutely. Again, congrats to James. He was able to
Yeah,
take the victory down over Clement. I'm going to think this is pronounced Kerbois,
sure. I
with
can't speak French.
the Dragapult. Dragapult once again in the finals, but this time, no Dusknoir. Instead, we
Mm-hmm.
see the Pidgeot line. And I will say, if you haven't watched this tournament, go back and watch game one of the finals, and you can see why Clement made it as far into the event as they did. That game was
Yeah, it was
kind of
really
a
good.
masterclass in how to play the Regidrago matchup from the Dragapult side. I believe at one point James was up 2-6, and Clement was able to take a 6 prize turn to just totally sweep the game out from under James. Now, I will also say James's hand was a little awkward. His draw wasn't super stellar. He had to use his V Star in a position where he didn't necessarily want to, so he wasn't able to protect himself from that kind of counter catcher stall that ended up happening. But still, I would say props to Clement for being able to pull this out and showing that Dragapult can be functional and successful both with and without Dusknoir, which can make the deck more dangerous because it's more difficult to prepare for it if you don't necessarily know which build your opponent is rocking.
Clement, I guess, is it Clement? I don't know. I can't speak French, but
I'm honestly not sure.
he played some of the best Pokemon I think on the weekend, repping France really well. So I'm excited to see him move in the future, see how he does. He seems like a player on the rise for sure.
Absolutely. I believe that this he's either a first year master or this is his first year playing. And in either case, going to
So
show why
impressive.
this younger generation is definitely something to watch out for as us old guys continue to fade into the distance. Roan Roan Nielsen comes in third place with Snorlax. The big standout here is Prime Catcher in the deck.
Mm.
But and the Diancie. Diancie is a nod
Yeah, I'm
to
about to
attempt to
say
beat Lugia
I haven't seen Diancie yet.
for sure,
The
for sure. So
Lugia,
the
I guess
Diancie
knockout
with
weird
its
here with it.
diffuse diffuse reflection. Well, realistically, if your opponent has a
Yeah, and
solid amount of energy on board, you can knock out a lot of things with this. But yeah, the big thing would be knocking out the
true.
Chinchino so that your Cornerstone Ogre Pawn could then come in and stall the game out for you, hopefully. Or Mimikyu, I guess. But, Mimikyu can get destroyed by Archeops, so the big thing would just be the Ogre Pawn at the end of the day. And then I guess the Prime Catcher is serving as the fifth counter catcher for the deck. Something that you can Arven for and act as another Gust to lock something active with Snorlax. We see a lower quantity of Handheld Fan, which is one of the cards that I felt made your Regidrago matchup more winnable. So I'm a little bit surprised to see that be cut down. But maybe having access to another item-based Gust helps out enough and lets you slow the game down enough in your favor to kind of get around that. Tough to
Yeah, and the
say.
fan, the lower count of handheld fan might have burnt him. He lost to Dragapult Clement again in top four, which I have no idea how that happened. Like that doesn't make sense to me. Like, yeah, I don't know how. So Clement's doing something right. Like I think the only way he lost this tournament was because his games 2 and 3 in the finals were unplayable. But yeah, it's such a it's interesting to see Snorlax do well. I don't think it's a surprise at this point, but
Sure.
it's always like oh, of course Snorlax is like we just expect it, which is saying something. It's not always not every format where you have a good control deck like this. And I know people don't like to play against it because it doesn't feel like Pokemon, but it still takes a lot of skill to pilot this. So, it's cool to have alternate win conditions still popular.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. It keeps things fresh, keeps people honest. We've got another couple of Regidrago lists here in fourth and fifth place. Fourth place with Alberto Conti. Again, what I would consider to be fairly standard of a list. No Knock
Mm-hmm.
Towel in this one. Instead, we have the extra response to Snorlax in the form of Penny, and an extra copy of Earthen Vessel, rounding out that extra slot as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and the penny and no switch is interesting. Like he doesn't run a switch card other than the prime catcher.
oh, fair enough.
Um, so I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting because you want the early aggression. Sometimes you get with switch. So like if you start the Kyurem or start
Hmm.
pretty much like, or if your opponent bosses up a Drago V, you have a way to retreat it. So
Right.
I guess Alberto's like, well, I'd rather just penny up Kieran and then discard it and have that ability to do that as opposed to, and you can penny, you can pull off some cute plays with penny with the ogre pawns, recycling the energy for extra draw. Maybe get another Mew down if you're down to like just penny in hand. You can just penny Mew, use it again.
Sure.
But
Sure. I think the big thing
um,
though has to be the utility in that Snorlax matchup, where
yeah,
using
for
a
sure.
switch is nice and all, but if the thing just gets counter catchered up again, it's kind of a wash. Whereas the penny removing it from the board, trying to force them to Erica if they really want to do anything, and that's assuming you can't Ultra Ball away whatever it is right after you penny it. Definitely has its uses, has its utility. We already saw Kaiwan was playing the same exact list as James, so we're not going to pull that up.
Mm-hmm.
Another kind of standout name would be Joshua Van Oversheld, who goes by Zapdos TCG, kind of a pretty big Pokemon
Mm-hmm.
TCG YouTuber, with the Fat Rat line in his Lugia Archeops list, along with
It's a
something
lot
that
of
I've been
rats.
trying out recently, the like the deck of choice that I've been playing this past week, because I do have a challenge coming up on Friday, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to play to it, and I'm somehow convincing myself that it's not Palkia Dusknoir. Um, but I've been playing a little bit of Lugia, and instead of playing 4 Professors Research, I've been playing 3 Research and 1 Carmine. But I still have the Squawkabilly in there as well for the kind of
Mm-hmm.
dual use of being able to do something on turn 1 going first when you typically want to go first with this deck. And instead, Josh brought things back, and it looks like he's been playing the same list since
Oh wow,
Worlds.
yeah.
Kind of taking the Rahul strategy. Like, I've been playing the same 60 since Worlds. Why would I change it now? And just kind of slow, steady progression of success. Decent success at all 3 of these events. Day 2 at all 3 of those events. And, I guess carrying the excess rats that Rahul dropped along the way. Because I don't know many other people that are playing 3-3 at this point.
No, it's very uncommon.
for sure.
Yeah, we definitely see some interesting things in this list. The two jamming tower, like that seems like a holdover as well.
Oh, true.
No Mezagoza, so I think that worked well this weekend into a bunch of like this list seems really well positioned to beat Raging Bolt.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think maybe that's the thought process with it. Cool to see. I mean, Lugia, it's one of those like Lugia, Drago, and I think Snorlax have just kind of asserted their dominance in this format. They're always
Sure.
going to be there. It feels like Drago really didn't have a huge showing. I don't think we might have had one last week in Louisville.
Yeah,
Um,
Drago's kind of been something that ever since Worlds has kind of been around, but this is the first time it's been able to fully take an event down.
right. Yeah, it was kind of like a matter of time. It feels like Mew was back in the day where we were just
Sure.
like waiting for Mew to take their crown as like the head deck in the format. And yeah, it's definitely cool to see. I mean, I'm a Drago believer.
Of course,
So
you have been. Longtime fan.
yeah. So it's always fun to see like the deck you're maining do well.
Absolutely. To see something a little bit different, another Lugia player who, as we can see down here at the bottom, continues to play the same list across the regional cycle from this season is Ethan Wild. Uh, Here we see another variation in the rat line. We've got a 1-2 Chinchino, but then also rocking the Thornton to be able to recycle that Minchino should it get
Yeah.
discarded. Um, I don't really know how I feel about that. Like the Thornton, I think can definitely surprise people. I don't know many people who really expect you to play it in the deck, and it lets you get away with doing some things like discarding Blood Moon early to kind of maybe lull somebody into that false sense of security that's not going to come back and bite them. But that probably works one game during a couple of sets on day one, and by day two, people would be a little bit more prepared for it to at least be a possibility.
Yeah. Thornton's still cool. I think it's an underrated card in this meta. I know it might be a gimmick in some scenarios, but it also just helps remove threats from your board. Like if you start Squawk early
Sure, sure,
or have a Luminion, you can like Luminion for Thornton and then get a Pokemon you had in your discard pile. Like in other hands, you can use hands. Well, I guess you can't really use hands twice because Legacy goes, you can't get that
right.
back. But yeah, you can get like the Rat line back or
Or second weird ear, I guess. Like you've
yeah,
got you've got options.
yeah. So or like bundle again is kind of cool. If in theory you could go, okay, I have a threat. I have like a Squawkabilly on my bench, and I can just go, okay, Thornton into bundle, and then just get rid of the bundle right there.
Sure.
So that's kind of cool
Yeah, definitely options to play around with in Lugia.
for
Uh,
sure.
Apparently, the rat line has not been fully nailed down yet.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to see a 1-2.
And then rounding out the official top eight, we have Anthony Argente. Apologies if I got your name wrong. With the Raging Bolt list that I believe is very similar to Xander Perot's 60, but obviously not identical. We would see that down there at the bottom here on Limit List. Still, Pokemon Catcher. He's got the shoes in here along with 4 Bravery Charm, which to me feels like something major had to get cut if we're going to fit all of this extra stuff into the deck. We do only see one switch card.
and
Um,
and 3 catchers. Interesting.
Only 3 copies of Energy Retrieval. And I know that was kind of one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that really stood out with Caleb's list from last week was 4 Energy Retrieval,
Yeah, he's not
allowing
running
him to.
any non V's other than the
Oh,
Radiant Greninja.
true.
Yeah, but it just seems like all gas again. That's kind of the direction that it's been going. It's more just like a sequencing game for this deck.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty
Us.
pretty pretty typical, I'd say.
And then there was an asymmetrical cut here, and we got to see Nina play against James in that asymmetrical cut, and took a what I would say is was an overly aggressive line in game one that resulted in
Mm-hmm.
her losing. But otherwise, she I believe was on the win in Dortmund and lost that to not make top cut, and then made asymmetrical cut here. And I know for this one, I heard somebody speaking about it earlier that Nina is in fact a first year master. So again, these young players in the EU are really tearing things up and making a name for themselves as they move through things.
Yeah, you love to see it. I think it's good for the game that it's not just. I mean, we do have a lot of familiar names at the top
For sure.
at a lot of these regionals, but it is always good to see young, new, talented players come over from seniors or just come into the game and thrive. I think it makes it more exciting to watch for sure.
Absolutely. And then moving beyond our asymmetrical cut, Bennett Gardevoir makes an appearance. There were a couple of Palkia Dust Noir decks in the top 32. The other big kind of standout thing that I think we would be remiss not to talk about would be Sanders' take on Snorlax for this event, where he opted to cut Rotom from the deck, citing that it was too much of a liability in a lot of matchups to have this two prizer sit on your bench that you were kind of forced to use, and instead opted to use this very, what I'll call, interesting supporter line with cards like Colress Experiment, Choi, Welder, and Grusha, along with 4 copies of Trekking Shoes and 4 copies of Boxed Order of all things. And I believe if it weren't for Jared Grimes opting to put a single copy of Boxed Order in his Qianpao list last year for one regional that he made day 2, this would be the first time that Boxed Order got a limitless page. And so for Boxed Order, for those of you who don't know, and I cannot blame you for not knowing, is an item card that reads, search your deck for 2 item cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck, and your turn ends. So it's effectively an instant charge, but you know exactly what 2 cards you're getting, and you're giving up on that 3rd card as a result for being able to cherry pick them.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense in some ways, but it's also just like, is this better than Rotom, right?
Right. Are we just being different for the sake of being different? I can't say. I haven't played Snorlax a ton. But, I mean, obviously, Sander did very well. I believe was on a winning in at this event, made top 16. I know some people have already picked this up and done well in online events the past couple of days with the deck as well. So maybe there is something here. Maybe this will be the way to play Snorlax moving forward, but it would definitely surprise me, I think. But maybe that's
Yeah.
just kind of my old man itis kind of flaring up, not wanting to change the old expected ways.
Yeah, we have seen Xander pioneer new ways to play control decks. He always seems to find a way to make control his own. You know, even though
Yep.
Snorlax has been really popular, this is such a different, unique take on a deck that we've seen come to popularity. And I have to think he's put a lot of thought and effort into this. So I don't think it is a bad play if you're looking to try to build Snorlax. Maybe this would be a fun build to try out. It's definitely something different. I know the box orders also prevents you from putting Rotom V in play. It keeps the 2 prizer off your bench, so you can just concentrate on stuff that's really, really difficult to knock out,
Yep.
and not give up a prize advantage right away. So that's pretty nice. But yeah, it's you know, I don't think it's groundbreaking in its gameplay, but it's definitely a nice innovation on an old deck at this point.
For sure. For sure. And the nice thing, the deck is, at least currently, sitting under $35 to build in total. So you could snag everything pretty quickly and jump in, but I would definitely recommend getting some reps in before you try to take this to any sort of tournament, because learning to play the deck and then learning to play the deck under time constraints are 2 totally different things.
For sure.
Totally different things. John, before we move on here, was there anything else that you wanted to point out from the low results?
No, I think we've seen the meta kind of solidify. We have, you kind of alluded to it, like, or we talked about it briefly with the conversion rate for Raging Bolt. What I would tell players that are like looking at these results from week to week, we have what I remember, like, I know you played back in like the cities format, back
Sure.
like when we had marathons and people would metagame from cities to city, and you'd have, okay, this deck did really well, so you would know that everybody would be playing that deck tomorrow. So now we see, like, how are we countering that deck from the yesterday? Like, what's the counter to the deck that's popular?
Mm-hmm.
And then players even going a step beyond that and saying, what's the counter to the counter? So we're
Yep.
seeing that, okay, Raging Bolt did really well. So what's the counter to that? Okay, Tool Jammer in all our decks now. So we have Tool Jammer and Dragapult, Tool Jammer and Drago, Tool Jammer and Lugia. And so then you'll see, okay, well, what deck beats those decks? And you'll see, okay, Snorlax beats Drago, beats. I mean,
Well,
it
it
doesn't
doesn't
really
beat
beat
Lugia.
Lugia. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
No.
But we did see, Roan teching for Lugia with the Diancie, right? So I mean, people are coming up with answers now. That was kind of cool. So yeah, it's always fascinating. I think that's what makes this game so much fun, is that you're not restricted to 1 or 2 decks. You're restricted to a card pool, and you have to figure out what's the puzzle. And we see some players just kind of playing the same deck they've played since Worlds. Another one on the list over here is Luke Kirkham playing
Sure. The
um,
Gouging Fire.
the Gouging Fire deck. Yep. And he's played. I think he's played. You scroll down, yeah, I guess, but he's played it before, all
Yeah, oh,
throughout
for sure.
this season. It's kind of popularized it. So we see players kind of just playing the deck that has got them there. Yep, we see in
Yeah.
Dortmund, and then
93rd place in Dortmund.
yeah, like I think we're seeing a lot of players that are rewarded for maining one deck, and then they get, not to say lucky, but the deck that they've been maining is luckily well positioned for a tournament.
Sure.
They're able to make a deep run because they have like that knowledge matchup, that deep like deck knowledge, and so it's kind of like a preparation plus luck equals success kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So and that's good to see. It definitely, I think it's something that will probably continue going into LAIC.
Right. And we do have one more regional in this format. It's not this weekend, but I believe Gdansk is next weekend. I think it's the first
Yeah,
weekend of November. And then I
that
believe
sounds
the
right.
week immediately following that is LAIC. And, prior to LAIC, once Gdansk is finalized, one thing that I'm going to try to do is gather all of the day two matchup data that has been amalgamated by, I believe they go by PokeHive on Twitter. See if I can't scrape together all of those numbers and try to have an idea for an expected matchup table to try to inform people or help inform people if they happen to listen to our episode that week on what might be a good play looking at LAIC as we can kind of encapsulate all of the numbers across all of the major events leading up to it. But
Yeah, that sounds good. Like, yeah,
as
I think more data is better results.
of course, what's wrong with more numbers? And as we close out on current major events, I'm going to yield the floor to John as he takes us back in time to look at a major event of the past and a deck from that major event of the past in this week's time capsule segment. So, John, take it away.
All right. So as I alluded to in the opening segment, I did play in a cube yesterday. I went 3-0 with the deck I drafted, and one of the star Pokemon in the deck I drafted was Chandelure. And Chandelure came out of Noble's Victories, and it was popular even then. This was popular, it came out right before, on the cusp of EXs. I think we had Noble Victories,
The
and then
next set was
Emerging Powers,
Next Destinies was the next
and
set,
then
but
next. Okay,
Emerging Powers was the set before Noble Victories.
all right, thank you. Yeah, you gotta. It's been a little bit. It's been like 11 years or even longer. Holy cow. Yeah. So, but Chandelure is a really, really, I think one of the coolest Pokemon that is from Gen 5. And this has a really cool ability. It says Curse Shadow. Once during your turn, before you attack, if this Pokemon is in your active spot, you may put 3 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. So it's able to place 3 damage counters. So it's even stronger than we've seen Iron Valiant be able to place 2 if it's moved into the active. Similar to that, but you can kind of just camp it in the active and place damage. But some decks decided a different route, including this one. This deck decided to be totally degenerate and item lock you, and then also try to cycle paralysis. So yeah, you have Vileplume from Undaunted, right? Yep.
Correct. Yep.
This is a kind of squishy stage 2 with 120 hit points, weak to Psychic, which is really, really bad in this format because Mewtwo is so popular. But the good thing was that the only gust effect in this format was an item called Pokemon Catcher. And Pokemon Catcher did not have the coin flip attached to it.
Sure.
So
Just
you
yeah,
had
right. It was
you
just an
just you just
item-based
bring it
boss's
up.
orders.
Yeah. So
Yikes.
Pokemon realized the error of its ways shortly after this and errated it. But for this Worlds format in 2012, it was just item, bring it up. So Vileplume sought to stop that from happening by taking away all items with its Poke body. What's the Poke body? It's allergy pollen, and it says trainer cards here,
Sure.
but this was printed right before Black and White, and so there wasn't of distinction between what we have now with item and supporters. It was just all things were trainers. So Pokemon errated that to item cards. So that's important to keep in mind as you go through this. So you could still play supporters with Vileplume, and it wasn't an ability, which is relevant because it just can't be shut off by other stuff that
Sure.
shuts off abilities. So that was definitely annoying. Um, but yeah, looking at this, it's kind of an interesting pile. You have a couple support Pokemon here. You have Relicanth, which has for one colorless, it says choose a random card from your hand, or not random, sorry, choose a card from your hand, put it into the Lost Zone, then draw 3 cards. Pretty weak draw, but it has a really nice side effect of powering up Mew Prime, which is one of my favorite Pokemon. And Mew has the Pokebody Lost Link that says you can use the effects, or sorry, you can use the attacks of all Pokemon in the Lost Zone. And you still need the energy for that, but that allows you to get around the evolving requirement. You'll see that there's there's 3 Acelgor in here, but there's no Shelmet. So Acelgor is probably one of the most broken Pokemon in this format, in my opinion. But it has one of the most broken attacks. It doesn't seem all that powerful in retrospect, but trust me, like this instilled a lot of fear into players in this time. It's deck end cover. It has 50 damage, but it's auto paralysis. And then you shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it back into your deck, which is annoying when you have to evolve up. But Mew, being a basic that can copy attacks from Pokemon in the Lost Zone, you could just bench a Mew, attach a double colorless energy, use deck and cover, put it back in your deck. And then the coup de grace was you had the Chandelure that you could promote into the active spot. So Chandelure would sit in your active. Your opponent would be paralyzed. They couldn't do anything. They can't play any switching cards. There really wasn't an easy way to remove paralysis or switch out your active with one of your bench Pokemon while you're under item lock. So you'd have the Chandelure in the active, and then you would, at the start of your opponent's next turn, place damage counters using Chandelure, and then you would have free retreat thanks to Darkrai EX, which had Dark Cloak, which meant that any Pokemon or any player or any Pokemon that have any Dark Energy attached to them have no retreat cost. So very, very powerful. We have some other support Pokemon here. We have the Pichu, which has Playground for no energy cost. It says each player may search their deck for as many basic Pokemon as they like, and then put them on the bench, and then shuffle their deck. And then Pichu's now asleep, which, it's good and bad because whenever it's asleep, it has a sleeping face Pokebody, which prevents any damage done to it. So Pichu was just one of those Pokemon that you would get with Pcom. I guess in this case, you didn't really have a lot of setup. I don't even see a collector in
Yeah,
this deck. That's just interesting.
yeah, we didn't
Um,
have ball cards back then, so
yeah, you had supporter-based search, and you would normally run Pokemon Collector in this format, if I remember correctly, right?
um,
Um,
you could. The problem it would be for this deck. I think that you just needed to more readily be able to find combo pieces was the problem.
yeah.
So you don't end up having deck space for it. So you're just settling for,
Mm.
okay, I'm going to get my Pichu, get all my basics that way, and kind of set up from there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking how you got Pichu in the active, but it's not a huge deal. So this was a little slower getting Relicanth. You had to use Relicanth to get your attacker in the discard pile, but you did have some other attackers. You had a Terrakion in this, and then you could also use Darkrai. You have Psychic. So you had 2 Rainbow or 4 Rainbow, and then the 2 Prism.
Hmm.
Rainbow is basically any energy you have to, whenever you attach it, you put 10 damage, place 1 damage counter on your Pokemon that you attach it to, and this is any energy type, with just that negative downside of damaging the Pokemon. And then we had Prism Energy, which came out in the black and white next Destinies, which provides rainbow energy but only works for basic Pokemon, which isn't too downsiding. It's a little bummer. I was looking through lists in preparation for this. We saw Cliff didn't play this, but we also had Hampus Eriksson, who came in 32nd. He played Darkness Energy over Prism, which I kind of like, because it doesn't. Um, you can use the Darkness Energy on Chandelure. You don't get the added benefit of Darkness being the +10 um, damage for Chandelure, but it does act as a Dark Energy. So I kind of like
Sure.
that. Otherwise, you're just stuck using Rainbow Energy to retreat the Chandelure, which isn't always great. But we also have a cool card in Shaman, which allows you to, whenever you place it from hand to your bench, move around all your energy. Pretty broken. It allows you to like pull off some really cool combos to close out games, to rearrange your energy. And then we have Smeargle, which this card is such an interesting card to me. This card was around in the format for so long before it actually gained popularity, and it wasn't until we had like really strong supporters take over and have these turbo decks to where people were like, okay, well I can run a thinner line of supporters, and just use Smeargle to copy my opponent's supporters, so I can essentially play 2 really strong supporters per turn. So we see that here. And you can use Smeargle and copy your opponent's Professor Oaks, Professor Research, or Professor Juniper, sorry. But then the rest of it, I'm spending so much time on the Pokemon because that is primarily the deck. We also have, before I move on, the one Terrakion, which seems kind of like a random inclusion. It doesn't really fit with everything else we've been talking about. But I have to think you're just using it for Retaliate. If you look at this Worlds format, um, pretty much every deck is Darkrai. I'm not even exaggerating. We have, look at the meta percentage. The most popular deck was Darkrai Mewtwo. It was 14 of the top 32. And then the next popular deck was Darkrai without Mewtwo. And that was 5 or 6. Sorry, of the
Five.
top.
5. Yeah.
So 5. And then, yep. So 19 of 32. So that's nearly what? I don't know. My math's
That's
not that
over
great.
half.
Yeah, way over half of the format. And then you also had Zekrom Eels, which was weak 2 fighting, and you had that was pretty much it. Mewtwo Eels, I guess, but they really didn't run too much. You were mostly using Mewtwo in that matchup,
Right.
so you would try to either lock your opponent or just prevent them. Like you had a lot of time to set up. If you this format is insanely item driven. A lot of the decks were just turbo, running like 4 supporters, 5 supporters, like not many supporters at all. The logic was you would just use Smeargle to copy your opponent's supporters more than your own, and you would run random receivers to like burn through your
Yep.
deck to find the 1 or 2 supporters you needed to play, and then the rest of the time you're just like, okay, dark patch, swing with Darkrai,
Mm-hmm.
and it was pretty successful. I mean, I know a lot of people don't love 2012. This was honestly, to me, it feels a lot like you're just playing like speed chess or something like that. Like the turns are really fast. You can do a lot, but you can't really do an insane amount. And it's just like you're hitting, and then you get to the point where you're just engaging in Mewtwo wars. You're doing like tits for tats really efficiently, and it comes down to some really cool, interesting plays. But this deck sought to slow all that down. It doesn't run a lot of items because you're under item lock the whole time. You're basically just running PCOM, Pokemon Communication, and Rare Candy. And then it runs one of the most expensive cards currently. It runs a Tropical Beach Stadium, which is pretty strong. It says once during your turn, this player you can draw until you have 7 cards in hand, and then if you do, your turn ends. So this was the Worlds promo for this year. So every player that played in Worlds got one. But if you didn't play in Worlds or uh, didn't have access to it, it was easily like the most expensive card in this format for a long time. And it still is like I don't know. You have to go back and look at eBay prices, but it's like a $300-$400 card still today.
Yep.
Just because it's so exclusive and so powerful in these retro formats. But anything, we can go over the supporters real quick. You had Professor X New Theory. Sorry. Yep. So just shuffle, draw 6. This deck usually went behind on prizes pretty quick, and then sought to like make a big comeback with Chandelure with locking your opponent. So you would just use twins. You would, if you're behind on prizes, you can use twins. You can search out for any 2 cards. You would get a twins and the piece you needed to pull off your combo, and then kind of just chain it together until you had like multiple KO set up with Chandelure and all that. You had Sages, which was just a terrible supporter that we had to play because there wasn't a lot of good supporters. It's just burn through your deck mostly. Similar to like what is it, Underground Expedition or something like that, where you look at the top 5 instead of.
Well, it's like Hapu, or like the modern equivalent would be Explorer's Guidance.
That's what I meant. Explorer's Guidance. Yep. So
Yeah.
like Explorer guys looked at the top 6, choose 2. This is top 5, choose 2. So I guess it depends on whether like what are you trying to do, but you're just trying to find your combo
Well,
pieces, trying to find your turn 1, turn 2 Vile Plumes, and then just kind of slowly set up from there.
and it also
Yep.
Sages serves a little bit of a separate purpose in this deck as well, because once you do have Vileplume up, your other item cards are totally useless, as an example.
That's
Or
true.
once you have 1 copy of Excelgor in your Lost Zone, you don't need the other 2 copies anymore. So you can kind of filter some of those dead cards out of your deck using Sages as well. Like
Yeah,
once you've
that's a good
got to
point.
the very specific board state that you need to with this deck, you could just kind of shift away the rest of your deck, and you just want to slim it down so that you're drawing Mew double colorless every turn.
Yep. So that was the whole point of the deck. It took a long time to set up, usually like 3 or 4 turns. You'd be giving up prizes, but eventually you'd get to the point where you can, just lock your opponent out of the game, make them to like with Chandelure, with a Selgor, with Vileplume. There's just nothing in this format that can combat this lock deck. There wasn't, a Russian Keldea. There wasn't Verdant or Verdant Green, Emerald Green. I forget the name of the ability. Merizian.
Right.
This was just so powerful in this format. I think this is probably the peak for this deck in my mind. I don't know. What do you think? Like you played in this. I know if you look, this is a 14th playlist. If we go to the standings, our very own Aaron Curry got 13th. So he did play in this tournament, and you played a lot in this format. So what do you think? Is this your favorite way to play Chandelure? I know this is probably one of my favorites. I like the lock deck variant of it. But we did
um,
see some like triple V or not triple V, like a Vanillix Chandelure. We saw Duo Chandelure. We've seen, and later on with Plasma coming out, we saw well, that was Gothitelle, not Chandelure. But like
right.
Chandelure had a pretty long shelf life, especially considering the power creep that occurred. This was probably the only deck that ran Rare Candy in the top 32. We see like 3 copies of it, I think, in the top 32. I don't think there's
There
another
were a
deck.
couple of there were a
Okay,
couple of
you're right.
Magnabor players that snuck in here from
Holding
Canada.
on, love to see it. But yeah, definitely in this format, Rare Candy was very harder to find.
For
So
sure.
this is
For sure.
after. I think this was the first deck that didn't run. It is the first deck that doesn't have Mewtwo or Darkrai as their main attacker.
Right.
Um,
Oh,
so
that's for
that's kind
certain.
of why I wanted to feature on this. I like you had the rogue trivia questions. I definitely like looking at this kind of. It's more of a rogue strategy.
Speaking on Chandelure, I will say Chandelure was one of my favorite cards in the black and white block period. I think that the whole line has so much going for it. Like we didn't really talk about it, but this
Oh,
promo
true.
Litwick, once it got released, had Call for Family, so you had another basic that could help you set up. The Lampent in a lot of scenarios was actually a really good attacker because you could Luring Light up something off the bench that would then be stuck because your opponent is under item lock. You get a turn to kind of play around with things that way. Um, Actually, not sure if you mentioned the second part of deck and cover. So you mentioned that it paralyzes, but it also
Oh, you're
poisons.
right.
So one of the things that you can do playing with your Chandelure damage counters is setting up kind of perfect math so that whatever is active gets KO'd coming back into your turn, or you're able to knock it out with Chandelure on your turn and then follow up with another deck and cover as a response to that. And just the ability to play a very calculated game is really cool with this deck. It's definitely annoying to play against because, like you said, once it sets up, as long as it does not miss its loop for a turn, you're not going to win the game, and there's
Yeah,
nothing you can do about it.
And this variant really didn't miss its loop too often.
Sure.
There's other variants that ran like the Muna Musharna line to just draw into more stuff. But this one is probably just a little more streamlined, just
Yeah,
to stand a chance against these turbo decks in this format.
for sure.
But
Yeah,
yeah, that's
I know a lot
oh
of people
good.
don't like this format, but maybe that just means that there's something wrong with me. This is one of the few retro formats that I actually have multiple decks built for. And part of that's probably a nostalgia thing just because I did well at Worlds this
Yeah.
year. So it's like, okay, I want to preserve that. So I've still got my Worlds deck built. I think I've got either Jay Hornung's list, which is just like a straight speed Darkrai Mewtwo, or one of the Terrakion Mewtwo's from either
Mm-hmm.
Igor or Harrison. Their lists are very similar. I don't remember. I have one of those built. And um, now this is making me want to go play some 2012 and put together one of these Chandelure decks, though, John.
Yeah, great. Love to hear that. Yeah, I mean, this is such an interesting top 32 if you look at it, because it's such a good cross section. You have Michael Pramawat, you have we see Jason Klaczynski at 20th, and if you scroll all the way down to 29th, you see a familiar name, Tord Reklev. So I think it's really cool to see like a lot of names you still see out there, competing 12 years later. And this, I think people like hate this format, but I think it's really skill expressive in its own way. And we see that with a
Sure.
lot of top players doing well. You know, I mean, that to me is an indicator. It's not maybe the most fun format to come back and play, but I like it. It's more like I said, people love 2012, or sorry, people love 2010. People love like Sun and Moon Lost Thunder because
Hmm.
it's like more methodical, slower paced setup decks. I like this format because to me, I can get games in. Like I can play
Yeah.
this like 30 minutes, you're
Sure.
done. Like, and
Yep.
you're, and I always, it's fun to me. Like, I don't know. I think I'm with you when I like 2012 a lot because it was
Well, and
also like when I started playing
right.
competitively, like I started 2011, but I really didn't focus on the game too much till 2012. And I remember watching this Worlds, watching Harrison Levin think that he had the Shaman in his deck still, and it was prized, and just that whole gaff on the world stage that just let him, it slipped through his fingers in the finals. So I don't know. This was a fun format to me, and I'm glad I got to talk about it today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in a lot of ways, this is actually somewhat reminiscent of either the Shrouded Fable format or our current standard format,
Mm-hmm.
in that you're not doing quite as many actions and decks aren't quite as consistent, but you're able to do very, very powerful things on your first or second turn of the game, regardless of what deck you're playing. With the exception, probably, of the Chandelure deck. It probably takes
Right.
like till your third turn to really get things going. Everything else is very, very strong in this format very
I'd agree
quickly.
with that. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that that'll close out our time capsule for the week. And just to close things out, I wanted to mention that pre-releases start this week, and because of that, we're going to go ahead and use the next week, since we won't have any competitive results to go over, to talk about the Surging Sparks set that will be, again, pre-releases start this week, releasing officially on November 8th. And we're not going to go through the whole set, more than likely. We'll just kind of pick out a few key cards, probably talk about a lot of the EXs, and then just some kind of more interesting cards that are scattered throughout the set.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, and I haven't really looked at the set too much, so I'll probably be doing that this weekend. And I'm running a pre-release Monday, so I'll definitely get a little more familiar with everything by then. I'm doing a fun thing for I'm doing pre-release this week coming up on Monday, and then we're gonna do a Ditto draft the following week where you take your pre-release kit, you take the items out of there, like the build and battle deck, and then you open your packs, and we do what's called a Ditto draft, where it's not a draft, but it's Ditto format where you're able to evolve up. You have to go basic, stage one, stage two, but you're able to evolve up based on um, like I think mutant rules. Like you don't have to have the same type on there, so you can just go any basic goes evolves to any stage one.
Okay.
So it'll be a little more fun, something different because I know the pre-release format can be fun. It's gotten a lot better with the build and battle decks. I don't know when the last time you played in a pre-release was, but it's a lot of fun. It's
Fairly recent, yeah.
there's always the decks aren't super high power level, but you're able to do things, and it's still fun.
Right.
Like I think it's still rewarding to like play pre-release, even though you're not really going to play with those decks again for the most part. But it's always a good time.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's still more Pokemon at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, Pokemon is not the most draftable game since a lot of the sets are pretty bloated. If we were streamlined a bit more to kind of like have the smaller set sizes that Japan does, I think the game would be a lot more draftable and would probably make things a little bit more interesting. But given that our sets are 200 plus cards and you just have no idea what you're going to open, I mean, you could get your whole build and battle deck and then you just pull Pikachu's not a good example, but there have been multiple sets in the past where if you just pulled whatever marquee EX
Mm.
card and were able to play it, you could just get rid of the entire build and battle deck and play that EX in 39 energies and just run over people to win games. And that's not really the point of the format, but some people just care more about winning. Like if you're going to show up that the build and battle decks are fairly well balanced against each other for the most part, um, and it just gives you the ability to highlight cards that otherwise may not see play, and you also get to pick up the cool promo variants of some of the cards.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes the promos are really good cards. Like we've seen Cleffa and Archeops and stuff that's in standard constantly have promo variants. So if you're a collector, it's definitely one of the best values for money that you're going to be able to find, especially you get the cards before the street date. So I definitely, if you are listening and you're interested, like, hey, I'd like to play in a pre-release, just go to Pokemon.com, go to the event finder, and you can search for pre-releases specifically in the event finder. So there should definitely be some in your area, and it'll be starting next weekend. So like the next 2 weekends will be pre-releases. So yeah.
Well, before we close out, just say, I've been lax in mentioning this, but you can follow John and I on Twitter. Um, my handle is at _ Aaron _ Curry, and John's is at John Paul Orgel. Good luck spelling it if you don't know how to spell it.
It's Orgel. Yep. For John Paul, you're on your own.
I was going to say, I do include them in the description of all of the episodes as well. So you can find us over there if you want to discuss things. We'll also have the comments open on all of our episodes on Spotify, and we would appreciate any feedback that you can give, any interaction that you want to have. And if you want to leave a review for the show, we'd also appreciate it. It helps other people find the show if they're looking for something new to listen to. So with that being said, I think we are ready to close it out for the week. Thank you again, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the Battle Frontier.